Just confirm that you can see my screen, please.
Yeah, we can see your screen, Jacqui.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's get started. Just kind of for the formality of the session, we're going to be looking at how we use UiPath StudioX in terms of citizen development, since that is what the series is about. And we're going to round off the last 10 days of really good content that we've now received by going through a practical use case and understanding what some of the good practices are. So you've learned a lot of good things. You've learned how to work with different components of the offering. You've learned how to do different things, how to work with different use cases. Now we're going to bring all of that together and see how we can improve our experience and things that we can stay cognizant of while we're developing. So just as a brief introduction, just covering, the introduction that I've already gotten. My name is Jacqui Muller. I am the chapter leader of the Johannesburg UiPath chapter. So here in South Africa, I'm the first and only UiPath MVP. I'm also an application architect at Dimension Data. I do some lecturing work at quite a few different institutions, and I have quite a few blog posts available between the two blogs that you see on the screen. So I've encapsulated my QR code. The recording will also be available, so if you don't catch it now, that's okay, it'll be available later. Please do reach out, connect. It's always great to keep in touch with people over LinkedIn. I find it's a really good way for me to learn from other people, and it's a really good way for me to stay connected to people that I encounter and interact with in these kinds of sessions as well. So let us start off with citizen development and what that actually means, and where its place is, I think, in this community of ours. So I mean, industry is quite big. Our kind of focus and the way that we're seeing the future is starting to shift. It's starting to change. So we're starting to take a lot of the power that we give developers, and we're starting to spread that across, different career paths, different industries, people with different skill sets, and we're trying to make it easier for them to become part of our community as well. I mean, I think that's the big thing. If we look at how the fourth industrial revolution and the fifth industrial revolution are shaping up, we're trying to spend a lot more time focusing on how we can use technology to make our lives and the people around us, their lives better as well. So if we look at citizen development, Christian once said that the citizen development movement has the possibility to empower a large number of people. And I think this is probably one of the most underrated statements, because if we can create a community where people feel comfortable developing, even if they don't necessarily have intense coding or programming skills, then we've achieved something. If we can include people into what we're doing and we can find a common language to communicate with, I think that's when we start realizing we're doing something right. And I think that should be our goal. So if we look at some of the good practices that we try to instill, not only in citizen developers, but in normal developers, and when I say normal developers, I mean people who traditionally, work on normal studio, work on different coding languages, all of that is kind of encapsulated in a set of principles and a set of standards. And those are generally what make up our good practices. Now, those are some of the things that we like to bring into citizen development as well, just to maintain consistency. And I'll start explaining some of those benefits as we go along. So if we look at some of the good practices, some of them that I can kind of name off the top of my head is naming conventions, comments and annotations, consistency, and then the bigger picture. So if we break these down little bit by little bit, we start looking at naming conventions and we start wondering what that means, right? And there's multiple different ways that you can look at naming conventions and how to implement them. So when we talk about naming conventions, we're essentially talking about the titles, the descriptions. The first time we look at an activity or the first time we look at a solution, we want to understand what that solution is doing. And the best way to do that is by choosing a naming convention and sticking to it. So what developers love doing is they love making their own life difficult. So they'll create a standard where they prefix their variable name with something very specific. They might have a specific way that they try to name things. So for example, if they're using a certain type of activity, like maybe data tables, they would then start prefixing their variables with a DT to show that it is a data table. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily the best thing to do. It is what works. And in a lot of environments that you find yourself in where this is going to be your new norm, you'll find that people kind of veer towards their own naming convention, something that makes sense to them. It's never really a great idea to keep something named the default, keep something that is aligned with the default name, because you very easily and very quickly become confused with what your solution is trying to do. And we like to say as well, when you publish normal solutions to the orchestrator as well, and you're trying to debug where things start to go haywire, the easiest way to do that is to use the name. So you can track the names of your activities back to where the error started occurring, where things started falling apart. So some of the naming conventions that we can apply are specifically to the activity names. So if we're looking at things like saving email attachments, or we're looking at set variables or those kinds of activities, as soon as we drag them over into our flow, we want to make sure that we rename them to something that is intuitive, something that we understand. And if somebody else needs to look at our code, they'll understand what it's doing as well. So in terms of activity names, this is essentially what I'm referring to here. So we've got 1.1.2, save email attachments. Now, what you can do to make this less generic is you can actually say what email it is that you're trying to save. You can name that a little bit better. You can say which folder you're trying to save the email from. This is now kind of where you start to decide what your consistency should be. So if you're working with emails and you want to encapsulate the topic or the filtering that you're including into your email, or if you want to look at separate folders, those are the kinds of things that you would use to very much determine what your naming convention should be. Likewise, when we start looking at variable names, something that I like to do is I like to put the variable that I'm saving inside of my activity name, so that if I do a quick search, I can find my activity right off the bat. Then we start looking at comments and annotations. And this is where it starts to get really interesting, because it is arguably a trade-off between being able to name your activities correctly and then being able to comment on them. So when we work with comments and annotations, this essentially means we're actually leaving, text paragraphs that explain exactly what our activities are trying to do. Now, there's two different ways that we can do this. There's multiple different levels that you can do it on. You can break it up into different scopes. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do. But the way that I like to do it, the way that's simpler for me, and the way that I've seen other people use it as well, especially in our communities, they break it down into a summary annotation and an activity annotation. So the whole point of a summary annotation is it gives a summary of what your code is going to be doing. So this generally lives on the highest level, and we'll start talking about the levels now when we get into the practical side of things. But the top level of your flow is essentially where you would want to keep the summary of what you're trying to achieve. Because once you start listing those logical steps, you can work your way down as a developer and you can understand exactly where the different steps are being implemented and then kind of approached from which perspective. Then we have the activity annotation. Now, this is where we start to say in a very, very high level basis what the activity is trying to do. So we're not so much providing a summary, we're not so much providing next steps or instructions on how to change things. All that we're doing is we're saying this activity does this. And that's really important as well, because as you can see here on the right-hand side, the activity annotation here reads as follows: replace all occurrences of the text first name with the FN value. So we'll look at what the FN value is because we're going to be using this example. And what we're then essentially looking to do is replace all of those occurrences of the first name in brackets with whatever variable we've got inside of this spreadsheet. So we'll break this up a little bit further and I'll explain to you exactly what this is doing, but this is just to explain to you how comments and annotations would work. Now, the next big thing that we want to remain very cognizant of when we're doing development is consistency. So we want to remind ourselves that our code does a certain thing. And the best way that we can do this, the best way that we can create our own development approach is by remaining consistent with whatever we decide to do. Now, with this being said, there's no wrong way of implementing this, or there's no shameful way of deciding this naming convention isn't working for me, I'm going to change it up a little bit. That's completely okay. That happens a lot. The big thing is when you define a naming convention, it's important that in your solution you stick to it. So if you're building a solution and halfway through you decide the naming convention isn't working for you and you switch it up, you actually need to go back and change that as well. So the first thing that we look at is deciding on a convention name. That's generally, the first place that we start at. We make sure that we have some sort of idea of how we want to remain consistent regarding the naming conventions throughout our solution. Like I said, if it changes, it's fine. Just go back and fix it. Then what we do next is we essentially decide when and what to annotate. So this is now where we start looking at what level we need to provide summaries. Are we going to provide one big summary in the beginning? Or are we going to break that summary up little bit by little bit? Kind of how are we going to annotate and leave comments, and to what degree are we going to annotate? Are we going to use a convention where our name should be as precise as possible that we don't need to describe what the activity is doing in an annotation? or what does that approach look like? Those are the kinds of decisions that go into step 2. Then for step 3, we look at reviewing the solution and ensuring that we've implemented all of our decisions, all of our standards, and everything we've decided on very consistently. So if you came across the process where you'd use the convention, let's say, to annotate, and you decide halfway through that it would be better if you did a summary level, maybe in different parts of the flow instead of just one. Step 3 would be now where you identify where those inconsistencies came in, and you'd actually go back and fix it. Once you've done all of that, step 4 is then where you review your code to ensure that you've removed as many hard-coded values and stored them as variables as possible. Now, this is a very important aspect because I've seen many, many developers, even those who have been programming for many, many years, make this mistake. When we're conducting or when we're developing RPA solutions, we very, very easily fall into the trap of, hard coding a file path or hard coding the value because we think it's not going to change. Then 6 to 12 months along the line, we've implemented the solution, it's deployed, and now we need to start scaling the solution. We now need to start catering for more than just that hard-coded value. And that sometimes becomes really difficult because if we had taken the correct measures to make those variables dynamic and make those values dynamic, we would have not needed to rework the solution to the degree that we now have to make this work. And I think that's why I'm such a big advocate for using variables, because if you can take and if you can start the ideology and the approach, the methodology of working with variables as values, it becomes a lot easier to remain consistent throughout your development cycle. Now we start looking at the bigger picture, and essentially this is now where we start to consider the things that I just mentioned with variable usage. Now we start thinking about ways that we can scale our solution, how we're going to use our solution in the future, how we're going to expand on it. And essentially when we talk to developers who've been working with normal studio and with traditional languages, this is now where we start to kind of segregate their understanding and their ideologies, because when you're looking at a very traditional approach to programming, people have spent decades, pushing things like design patterns, architectural patterns, very, very stringent coding standards. And although we don't really need that to the degree that you would in a traditional language, we don't necessarily need that in the UiPath suite or in the citizen development suite, it's really good to understand the benefits that this would have. So if you break out your data access into one portion, you break out your business logic into another, those are really good concepts to carry through with how you're going to be able to scale your solution. But as a citizen developer, it's not really your, responsibility to take into consideration this image that's on screen. What I want you to do is compare that to the use of your variables and being able to identify possible enhancements. As a citizen developer, that's pretty much what we should be expecting, right? We should be expecting that we're able to scale our solution to the best of our ability without actually really caring about what the traditional standards are, how that's going to impact the solution to the degree that it could. Because if that was the case, we wouldn't necessarily be using StudioX, we'd be using normal Studio. So that's kind of the segregation between the two. And I think that's where we start to look at the comparison between the two different paradigms, from an industry perspective. It's really, really powerful to have a bunch of citizen developers in your organization, but you can't be expecting unrealistic things from them. And this is now where we start to, kind of amend the approach and the thinking around how we can still create very sophisticated citizen development solutions. And that's when we start moving over to use cases. So before I present the practical use case that we're going to be working on and I'm going to be demoing and taking you through, do we have any questions? I see the chat is relatively empty as well. So if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and let us know what you think or what you would like to know. Okay. Cool. Doesn't seem like there's any questions. If there are, please feel free to drop them into the chat or interrupt me while I'm talking, that's fine, but I'm going to move over then to the practical use case. So now in essence, what we're going to be doing is we're going to move over to StudioX in a little bit, and we're going to be working on a very practical use case. And if we start to think about, the things that we can do and the things that we've learned already, this is now where we start to, give ourselves the power of being able to achieve some really cool things. So we're going to look at a very default template kind of solution that is offered to us by UiPath, and I'll explain to you, the very intricate parts of how we get that working and how that kind of fits together. But essentially, this use case that we're going to be working with is taking incoming email content. That content is then pretty much processed as an Excel document. So the Excel document looks like this. As I mentioned, this is very stock standard. This comes from the template. I'll show you how that is kind of formed shortly. And what we would like to do is turn this input that we have over here into the output that we have right next to it. So we should then be able to send an outgoing email that contains a Word document as an attachment. That's this over here. And we should be able to send this information inside of the Word document. So we've got the first name, which is Keith. We've got some default text that we've added, and then the temporary password, which is assigned to him over here. Now, if we look at this in terms of a business process flow, we'd see that essentially when we're starting, we are receiving the email, we're downloading the attachment, we're then going to use that downloaded attachment to populate the Word template that we have. Then we're going to send that email with the populated template to the person who we kind of put into the to field. In this case, it's going to be the person that sent the mail initially. So the person who got the mail is pretty much going to receive the email address, or the email itself. But I'm going to show you kind of how we can change that up pretty much just for these demo purposes as well. So if there are no questions, I'm going to then move over to the demo. So one last chance for anybody who might not necessarily understand what the practical use case is before we start. I might have missed something. So if you have any questions or you're uncertain, please feel free to ask now. Okay, great. All right, then I'm going to get started on the practical demo. Now, as you can see, I've got StudioX opened up on my desktop. And what I'm going to do is start from the complete Word from Excel and email template. So what we can do is we can create a process name that's very specific to what we're trying to achieve. So we're completing templates from email. Okay, this pretty much sums it up. This is the default description that we get from using the UiPath template. Now, as you can see here on the right-hand side, there are quite a few different templates that could come in really, really handy. So some of the basic things that you might want to do might already have been done. And what's really nice about these templates is they connect to some of your default applications. So there's no intense manipulation that you need to kind of go through to get this to work. In many cases, this literally just works. So let's create the solution and wait for it to restore the dependencies. And then we'll go through the file structure and I'll explain to you how that looks and what happens, what the components are, and we'll kind of get into the nitty-gritties. Okay, so it's nearly done. Just adding a few more dependencies. There we go. Okay, so first things first, let's take a look at the project structure. So I'm going to open up the project folder, which looks, okay, it's popped up onto my screen. Let's just open that up over here. It looks like this. So before we've run anything, before we've done anything, this is what has been created for us with the template. So let's run through the collateral that we've now been given. We've got the welcome templates Word document. So if we open that up, we can see that it looks like this. So we've got file name that is over here. We've got the password that is over here. These are essentially placeholders. So what we're going to do is we're going to replace the first name and the password with the values from the Excel file. Let's take a look at what this project notebook looks like. Okay, we'll get back to that now. Let's look at the people. This is essentially the Excel document that I had on the PowerPoint presentation. So we've got a table that is listed inside of the spreadsheet. This contains the first name, the last name, the email address, and the password of essentially the data set we're going to be using. So as I'd mentioned, this is stock standard. This was created with a template for us to use test data. We can change the situation and the data up a little bit, which we'll do in a bit. And I'll show you what the impact is of that then as well. Then we've got the completed document or the completed attached document. And essentially, this is going to be what is sent off in the mail. So as you can see, this is a template. This just shows you that we've populated the template with Keith. We've put the password in there, and this would then be sent as an attachment. Now let's get to the other two files we have here. We've got the global exception handler and we've got the main file. Now this main.xaml file is going to be the actual solution that you put together. So if we chose not to start off with the template, we'd have just the main XAML file that we would then need to populate. And this is kind of what we've been looking at over the last 10 days. Then we've got the global exception handler, and it's not really something that you need to be too concerned about. The beautiful part about the global exception handler is that if there are any issues or any errors that your solution encounters, the global exception handler will take care of that for you. So it'll tell you what the issue is, and you'll be able to kind of change what that output or what the instruction is when you run into an error. So the rest of the files, the project.json file is pretty much just what you would use to kind of keep all of the configuration stored in there. That's default. You don't really need to stress about that. We've touched on the important files, so we can now go back to our solution and run through what we've already got there. So from the template, this has already been created for us. As you can see, there's quite a lot happening here. So let's break this down chunk by chunk. Let's go all the way back up to the top again. Okay, so what is happening here is we've got the completed template file, which is a variable. And this variable is saving the template or the file name of completed attachment .docx. As you can see, there's some comments over here that have instructions that tell us how this would work. And it would tell us that if we run this, it would work quite well. And the best practice would then be to save these values that we're going to use more than once in a variable. The reason why we want to save variables or values that we're using more than once in a variable is that if that value ever changes, we only change it in one place. We don't have to change it over and over and over again in all the different places that we're using. Next, we've got an Excel scope. So this is something that we've also touched on in the last few days. We're going to be connecting to the Excel file that we've got over here. This is the people.xlsx file that lives in the project file. So that's this one over here. And in that file, we're iterating through each and every single row that we have in that table. We're looking for that table 1, which is what we're iterating through. And now we're going to use the word scope. We're going to connect to that welcome template.docs file. And we're going to save the document to whatever that file name is. So as we've now said, this file name we've already put together as completed attachment.docs. And you can change that. You can set that to the name of each person that you're going to be retrieving from the data set if you really wanted to. So then you'd have a file per person. You can then also replace the text that we have in that file. So as we saw, we want to replace first name with the FN value from the table. So that's exactly what we do over there. We've got the replace text in the Word file, which we've also done. So we've replaced the password from the text file. Now, as you can see, a lot of this is very default. So we actually want to go in and we'll change that now. We've also got the use Outlook account. So this is now set up to our default Outlook accounts. We've got the email that is being sent. Although before we're sending this email, we're actually saving it as a draft. So this goes into a draft. We can take a look at it. And then once we're happy, we can untick this and we can actually send it. As you can see, we've got a validation error over here. And the reason for this is because it's by default, it's set to HTML. If you change it to text, you'll see that all the text pops up nicely and we have everything that we're expecting in there. So let's take a look, just as a reminder, to the steps that we want to execute now to be consistent. We want to decide on a naming convention. We want to decide when to annotate, and then we'll review the solution. So in this case, let's work on a naming convention that isn't too complex. All that we want to do is be able to identify exactly what we're doing, which files we're accessing, and we want to add that into our solution. We'll annotate when necessary. We'll have the summary right at the top, and we'll have very individual activity summaries as we go down. So let us start looking at how we can better implement and kind of implement and fix the naming convention that we have. So over here, we've got the use Excel file, which we now want to rename. And this name that we want to add, or the naming convention that we want to follow, is to reference the file that we're going to be using. So in this case, we can make it people.xlsx. That's the file that we want to reference. Here, we're going to go through each row. in the table 1. Here we want to use the Word file, so we can rename this as well. And this is going to be the welcome template. We want to save that file. So let's just quickly save that document as variable completed templates. Okay, then we want to replace text. So here we can say that we want to replace first name in variable. Well, we've already got it as the scope, so we can leave this out if we really wanted to. And then this over here, we would then rename password, or we'll rename the keyword password. Now, before we changed these two, we had the same description or name for both activities. Now, if something failed and we looked at the audit log, it'd be really difficult for us to tell exactly which one was working if we didn't have exactly the output of what ran and when it ran. And we'll take a look at that now after we run the solution. But it can get really tricky to pick up really quickly, where things failed if you don't name the items very, very specifically. Now, one thing that I have been preaching is remaining consistent, which I nearly blundered over there. Okay, next we want to update the Outlook account that we're using, and here we can just say default. And then here we actually want to send the Outlook mail with attachments. And you could potentially say that that's a variable if you really wanted to as well. Okay, so we've implemented our naming convention. We've done a very quick review of the code. We can see that everything's consistent. Now we move on. Now, this template is slightly different to what we'd initially set out to achieve. Because in this template, all that we're doing is we're reading the Excel file, we're populating the Word template, and we're sending it out. But we want to change this up a little bit, right? Because our process flow was a little bit different. So we wanted to receive an email, download an attachment, and then use that attachment to populate the Word template. Now, the first thing that we're going to do, I'm going to reuse code because I love doing that. So I'm going to right click on this over here, and I'm going to copy the use Outlook account default that we've already got set up. The reason I'm copying it from the template is because it's already set up for me. So if I can add it from over here, it's very easy to do, but now there's no additional lookups for me to kind of carry out. It's already kind of done for me. So I really like making my own life a little bit easier. Okay, so now we've put down our Outlook account. We actually want to read the mails that are coming in. So now what we can do is we can search for every mail that we're going to get in. We actually want to execute a bunch of steps. So for each mail, we're going to now, okay, let's maybe first set this up before we select a naming standard. Okay, so first thing that we can do is we can look at where in our Outlook this mail should be coming from. Now, as you can see, I've got quite a few different folders. I'm just going to select template because it's probably the least messiest of the folders that I have. I'm going to mark unread mail as the mail that I want to look at. I want to retrieve the attachment, and I want to look for mails with attachments only. But now I need the name to depict that. So for each mail in templates, we can say each unread mail. Spell in templates with attachments. Okay, so now essentially what we're going to be doing is we're going to look for each and every single mail that we have that is unread. We're going to grab that attachment, which is what we want to do now, and that's going to be the attachment that we then use throughout the rest of the solution. So the next thing that we now need to do is actually set a variable. So let's do that. Let's drag the set variable activity over. Now what we want to do is actually create a variable named file name. This is going to be how we identify the file that we are actually saving. So we want to set the variable value to or you could just do this file name. Okay, now we actually need to select a value to save. Now there are multiple ways to do this. Let's first figure out what we want to do with this variable. This variable, as we've now seen, is going to store the file name. Now the file name is essentially going to point us to exactly where we want to store this file and what we want to store it as. Now, if we look once again at the project file, we can see that we've got the people.xlsx file that we've got here, which is essentially going to be what is read by default. But what we might actually want to do is create a folder named attachments and store all of our attachments in the folder. That's what I'm going to do for this example. So we've now created an attachments folder. We can now use that as part of our declaration for the variables. So what we can do here is we can say attachments. Let me just make sure I spelled that correctly. Attachments, yep. And then / in this case, it'll be people.xlsx. You could rename this to something else if you'd like. This is kind of just for demo purposes of how we're going to achieve what we're setting out to achieve. Now, the next thing that we want to do is actually save the email attachment. You've got to please just excuse my spelling. Apparently, my spelling is not working so well with me today. And we're going to save this attachment using file name. Okay, now this attachment is coming from the current mail that we have, which is now depicted here in the for each loop. So for every email that we're now reading that has an attachment, we're going to save that attachment. We're going to exclude any inline attachments. If you want to add filters and make sure that you're looking for very specific files, you can do that as well. And then what we're going to do is actually save this to a folder. Now this folder, we can add as text because we know this is now going to be attachments. Okay, and we can overwrite the existing. Now what have we done here? We've created a file name where we've now included attachments as part of the value. But we've also now said that we want to save to a folder name attachment, right? So now what do we actually need this file name for? And that's the important thing, because now what we're doing is we're saying we're going to create this attachment. We're going to add this attachment to a folder. We're not going to change its name. We're just going to keep its name as is, but we're going to assume that that name is people.xlsx. So where do we actually use this file name? Well, this is now where things get interesting, because now what we've got to do is take all of this information that we have done here, everything that was given to us in the template, and put that as part of this for each loop that we have here, because we now need to apply that to each and every single file that we have or email that we have now that we need to process. So this save for later, we're going to drag up into the for each. So as you can see, that's now living inside of the for each. You can tell by the numbering as well. So we started off on 1.1, we've now got 1.1.3, which is what we're expecting to see. This XL, which is now on 2, we want to also pull up into the for each statement or for each activity. And now you can see the numbering changes. So we've got our 1.1.4, we've got all of that comes down. And what we can actually do now as well is we can remove this because it's already living in the scope, right? So this scope we've got defined up top here. Okay, so we've already got a default Outlook container. So what we can do is we can leave it there or we can delete it. It's completely up to you. I like to only use what I very, very much need to use, which is why I try to remove as many unnecessary scopes as I possibly can, but there's nothing wrong with keeping it there until you can figure out how to improve the solution and remove different things. Okay, so let's go through the top or from the top again and read through what we're trying to achieve. Okay, so we've got our default mail account. In that mail account, we're going to look in the templates folder for any unread mails that have attachments. We're going to take that file name that we're looking for, and we're going to assign a variable now and say that we're pretty much going to force or look for a file that is named attachment or people.xlsx inside of the attachments folder. We're then going to save the current attachment from the email that we're looking at to the attachments folder. Then what we're going to do is we're going to use the variable that was already created for us, and that's going to store the name of the completed document template that we're going to be replacing all of the values from. And now what we're doing, and this is now where things start to get interesting, because this is now where we start manipulating our values to use variables rather than hard-coded values. So here we've got the XLSX file, the people file, which we can now change to use the variable. So we can use the file name variable now instead, which would also reference this attachments.people. And we can now use that file to populate everything that is happening here in this Word file. Okay, so nothing has changed here, nothing needs to change, everything is still perfect there. Now what we need to do is very critically evaluate who we want to send this email to. Now there's one of two things you can do. You can either send this to the email that is in the current row, or you can actually send it to the person that the email came from. So maybe for this use case, we should actually just add the person that sent the original message as a CC contact. Okay. Now what we do is we go to Excel and we take a look at what we've got inside of our templates folder. Now the templates folder is another folder that I've created inside of my inbox. So as you can see, I've sent two different files. So let me just show you what that file looks like. This is the original file, very stock standard. It's the same template file that we got from UiPath. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark this one unread or as unread, because this is essentially going to be the email that we are using to execute the process. So now what we want to do is actually run the process and then put our hands together and start praying that it works. So what we're going to do now is read the file that we have and the mail that we have inside of our Outlook. We're going to use those values. So Excel then opens up the Excel document that we're now using to populate the Word document. That is now going to be processing in the background. We're going to be replacing everything that we need to replace in the background. Here our Word document opens up and you'll see the manipulations start to happen. That is then closed down. This should be closed as well, and the email then should be sent off to, well, saved as a draft, not necessarily sent off just yet. If we uncheck the save as draft portion, then it will send off. So let's just wait for all of these to create for each of the people that we've got in the file. So we've just done Christine, we've done Walter. We should now be processing Linda's file. There it is, there's Linda's file. There's Linda's temporary password. Okay, and then we can look at Keith. Okay, there's Keith's file as well that has now been generated. Now, what I'm going to do inside of Outlook is I'm actually, as you can see, the drafts are busy populating on the left-hand side over here. So if we look at what is living in the drafts now, we can see that we've got 4 different mails. The first one is the email address of Christine, and I've got myself in there as a CC, the same way that we'd initially created it to kind of send out. And we've got the completed Word document. So let's take a look at what that Word document looks like. As we can see, it's Christine's document, and that's her password. So all of the information was replaced into the template the same way that we'd expected, which is lovely. We've got a few more other mails that we've got as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to delete these. Okay. We're going to go back to templates. We're going to mark this one now as read, and we're going to move over to the top email that I sent through earlier today. And I'm going to show you what that Excel document looks like. So at this point, I've replaced some of the names already, not the last name. I've only replaced the first name. The passwords are still exactly the same, but the first name is different. So we're expecting to see a different set of results happening over here, or different results from the flow. So now what we can do is we can mark this one as unread, because we need to match the criteria from the solution to actually get it to run. We can run this and then watch what happens. So first off, we're expecting to see the Excel document open up, which is what is busy happening over here. We've got the 4 people that we want to create the letters for, 4 different first names. So the first one that we should be populating is Jacqui, which, as we can see, is what happened over there. We've got the password as well. Okay, and we'll just wait for all others to process as well. Okay, so we've got others. Now we want to populate Christina's file. Then we've got Christina's file. As I said as well, what we can actually do is if we wanted to, we could change the name of the template that we have up top here. We could actually include the name of the person whose file we're busy generating, and that would actually work really nicely. Okay, so everything should close down now, and we should see 4 new draft emails. Now, these 4 new draft emails should have different people's names in. So as you can see, that's exactly what has happened. Let's take a look at what these emails look like. The email addresses are still the same because the only email address that I changed in the file was my own. So here we can see this is populated completely the way that we'd expected, which is great. But now there's a few challenges that we might run into, right? So let's take a look at some of the things that we could potentially do. We could potentially mix up the names of the files that we're trying to populate. So let's create a copy of this. Let's paste this over here. And let's start manipulating this to become our own use case. Okay, so what we can essentially do is we can maybe remove 2 of these, or 2 sounds like a good number. Maybe let's just remove all 3. Just have one item that we're processing. Okay, we'll just need to resize the table. Okay, and then we can set this to my information as well. Okay, and we can actually make this a different value. Maybe we should make it look a little bit more like a password. Very believable. We can probably make these 5s as well. Okay, so we can save this now. And we can actually email this through. So let's create a new mail. Just drag this over. Okay, I'm going to be sending it to myself. We're going to make the citizen developer. Okay, and then what we actually want to do is drag this over as an attachment and send this off. Now what I'm going to do is this mail is going to come into my mailbox. So I just want to move this to the correct folder. I'll show you what that mail looks like shortly. Okay, so I've now moved that mail over, which looks like this. As you can see, we've got the people-copy over here. And that contains only this row. Okay, so we can close that down. We can leave this as marked unread, and we can run this program again, or the solution again. Now we're expecting the solution to only run once based on the input that we received, right? But that's not going to be what happens. We're still going to iterate through this file for the last file that we found. And why are we going to iterate through this 4 times? Why is it the file with 4 elements that have opened up? Because we didn't actually change the file name. And this is where it becomes really, really important to use variables. Because if we'd assign each and every single of the values that we were using to variables, it'd be a lot easier to track exactly which items we were using. So if you want to use the document that we sent in now with a different name, you'd actually go manipulate the flow. And in doing so, you might actually just want to create a variable and use the variable instead. So we'll watch this execute. As you can see, that we've already got 2 new drafts. We're actually only expecting 1. So we know that we're reading the wrong file. So just waiting for that to finish up. As you can see, we're on 3 drafts. Okay, so there's the 4th one that is now finished as well. Okay, so as you can see, we've got our 4 mails. It's not quite what we were expecting, so we're going to delete these and we're going to try again. But now we actually need to change our solution. So let's take a look and figure out exactly where the wrong file is being referenced. So we've got a file name, which is referenced as people.xlsx. So we've done something right? We've actually used the variable name. The problem is though that variable name is not the same variable that is now being saved from the attachment. So what we actually now need to start looking at doing is potentially moving this down. And what we then maybe want to look at doing is actually using what we have from, let's just quickly check here, selected mail. We might actually then want to change this file name to reflect what is happening in the email attachments. Okay, so we'll get to that. Let's just quickly change this as text for now. We'll figure out how to do that next part in a bit. So we do this. Hit save. Let's just take a look at our files again. So as we can see, we've got the two different Excel files. We've got the one that has the 4 entries and we've got the one that only has the 1. Well, it's supposed to only have the 1. In the attachments file, we've also only got the 2. So this is where it was reading from. We're reading this one and not this one over here. So what we actually want to do to test that this works is delete these 2 files. Because all of the files that we should be working with now should live in the attachments folder. Okay. Now what we can do is we can run the solution, although I think that's going to break because, okay, maybe it won't. Let's just see if we're quick enough. There we go. Mark that as unread. And it should now use this attachment to populate the file. So let's see if that is what happens. Okay, so we've opened the correct file now from the attachments folder, and we're now actually going to process this for one person only. So we should actually only see one draft be created, which is now what happens over here. Okay, so everything has worked as we expected it to. We can delete this, go back to UiPath. And then one other thing that we might want to start looking at doing, right, is, okay, so we can turn these into variables, which I would strongly suggest doing. And then another thing that we now want to actually do, we've now gone through the process of understanding what our solution is supposed to do. We've now understood that it works. We can save it as a draft. So what we're going to do is we're going to uncheck that and we're actually going to send this off as a mail. So now let's watch what is happening inside of our Outlook. Okay, our process is starting up. The Excel document is opening up. The Word document is being completed. And that should have completed. So now let's go to Outlook and take a look at what that has for us. Okay, so what actually now happened is I received a mail from myself. So let me just move this off screen and open up that mail because it's now living in my inbox. Okay, so that mail was now actually sent out to us. It was no longer saved in the drafts. So I'm going to move this back over. As you can see, there's nothing living in drafts. So we open up the email and we look at what that looks like. So we've got the completed attachment that we've now got in here. We've got the Jacqui that we've got up here. We've got the template password, and that's pretty much now sorted. Now, are there any questions before we move on to the next part of the exercise? Is everybody following so far? Have I lost anybody? Have I bored anybody to death yet?
Please, guys, we need feedback. You can drop it. If you can't talk, just drop it on the chat.
I think they are following what Jacqui is teaching. So that's why there are no questions. I think they are really understanding.
Awesome. I hope that's the case, because that then means that if there's no questions and everybody understands and they're following, then we're good. If there's anything
I guess
that
would be. The practice so far has been that if there are questions, people drop them. So these guys are not shy of asking questions. So if there are no questions, it means they understand them. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. That's great news. Perfect. So then what I'm going to do is move over to the solution. And now I actually want things to become a little bit more, kind of interactive. So what I want to do is find out from you guys, based on what I've presented now, what can we change in the solution? What should we change in the solution? There's no wrong answer. So I'm happy for you guys to kind of give your opinions about what we should change. Okay, maybe let's go back to the presentation and take a look at what we should be considering. Okay, so this is essentially our list of things to consider. So our naming convention, when we need to annotate, we need to make sure that we've implemented all of our stuff consistently, and then we need to make sure that we've removed any hard-coded values. So based on this, what are you guys thinking we should do next?
Come on, guys. Come on, guys.
I mean, I know it's the last day, but I think if we can kind of work together and start collaborating on this, it's going to make things a lot easier for us. Okay, let's take a look at the solution again. So we've got the templates folder. We don't really need to turn that into a variable because we're only using that once. We've got our current mails. We've got our file that's already saved as an attachment. We've got a few documents here. This one's already saved as a variable. Here we're using another file, which is not necessarily saved as a variable. So the first thing that I would do is change this to become a variable. Okay. The next thing that you can do is we can actually change the solution up a little bit. So if we change the use case up and we add more things, to the Excel document, and we add more things to be replaced in the Word document, that'd be a really good place to start as well, right? So let's take a look at the Excel document and figure out what we can actually incorporate and add to our template. So I'm going to open up the template and I'm going to open up the Excel document. So in the Excel document, we currently have first name, last name, email address, and password. Now, what we can do as well is we can add something like gender. This should not be hyperlinks, so let's just remove the hyperlinks here. Okay, let me just remove this column and put it in a different place. Gender, email, mail, and we can say insert. I keep doing that. Just do it here. As intended. Okay, here we can say true, 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 true. I know Christina's not here, but for the sake of this, let's say that she is. Okay, so we've now manipulated our document. We've manipulated our people.xlsx file. Let's take a look at what we can implement into our Word document now as well. So now what we're doing is we're manipulating our own file. We're making our own template that we're now going to use to populate based on what we're receiving from Excel. So now what we can do is we can actually add in gender. We can add a gender tag. We can unbold that. We can add as intended. And we can make this attendance. Remove this completely. We can save this. And now we can use this to update our solution. So let's now take a look at what our solution holds. Let's just remove all of this quickly. There we go. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to read that table. We're going to now, because we've now used this current row and we're actually reading the table, we're going to receive everything the same way that it is in the table. So if you had elements in the document that weren't necessarily in the table, you wouldn't have received them, but now because we're going to run this and it is part of the table, it comes through automatically. So all the new things that we've added, this column over here and this column over here will pull through automatically. That's the beauty of making sure your solution can scale. Next, we're going to look at what we need to change inside of the Word documents. So let's add a new replace. Let's rename this and let's make this gender. Now what we're going to search for is the gender. So let's just change that text over here. And make that gender. And this current row that we're looking for over here. Come on. We're supposed to be able to show that. Oh, there we go. Okay, so just replace this. Current row indicates in Excel. If we edit it as text, it should also work. So there should be current row. No, that's going to remove just for the text. So that's okay. For some reason, it's not letting me select in Excel, which is a bit annoying, but let's check one more time. Okay, let's do this custom input. And that is going to be okay. Now, what we can also do is we can replace the attendance. So let's do that as well. Let's check my summary because it's going to let me show this in Excel. Nope. Okay. Then let's change this to the custom input as well. Custom input. Nope, still not. Okay. This is then going to be has attended. I might actually want to make that one word. Save that. Okay, so it's picking up as attended. Just wasn't picking up gender for some reason. Okay, so let's close all of this. Let's take a look at the file for one last time. So we've got all of this. We can probably remove. Let's keep them. Okay, now the next thing that we actually want to do is send this off as a mail. So let me send this to myself. Okay, then we're going to go into attachments, grab this, paste that over. Let's just check what that looks like. Okay. Now what we can do is we can send that off. We can go into our solution. Just check this value that we've got up top here because it should still be people.xlsx. So I'm going to change this. Okay, so that was the mail that came through. I'll just move that over to the right folder. Save that over there and then move this across. Drop that into the applicable folder. Okay, so now as you can see, we've got that new item that has just come in. That is the XLSX document that we've got, the people file that we're looking at. It's got the new columns. So now in theory, what we should be able to do is run this and it should populate. Okay, so it's opened up the Excel as we expected. It's busy looking at the Word documents, which it's replacing. Just move this one to the screen. Okay, so it's broken with the word. It says that it does not find female. So that column does not exist. So let's stop it and take a look at what is happening inside of the solution. Okay, so at the moment, it's trying to find a column named female, which is not something that exists at the moment. So let me open up the Excel again. Let's try and replace this with a custom value. Gender column is fine, so it should be working. We can comment this out for now and check if the attendance works. Okay, that's all perfectly fine. This is still fine, so we can run our solution. Let's take a look at what is happening in the Word document. So we're expecting gender not to be populated because we've now excluded that. As we can see, the attendance has been populated, so that will send off another mail. So as soon as that comes in, I can open that up. Okay, hold on, we've got another one. Completed attachments. This is actually going to send out emails, so let us just stop this. Save those as draft. Okay, so in essence now what we've managed to do is we've created the file where we're only looking at replacing the first name, we're looking at replacing the password and the attendance. We're supposed to be able to get gender to replace as well. For some reason it's not letting me visualize it on Excel, but the attendance works. So we're supposed to be able to do the same as what we did with attendance with gender. So before we move on, I'm really hoping we can make this interactive. What are you guys thinking about this? How can we change this? Based on what you guys have learned so far, can you kind of identify what new use cases and what new kind of challenges we can bring into this? How can we expand on this? How can we scale this? Okay, I'm guessing everybody kind of feels that it's then kind of aligned to everybody's understanding.
Hello guys, so how can we scale this automation that Jacqui has built for us? How can we improve on it? How can we expand it? Any ideas? Any suggestions? Damilola, Lydia, any contributions? You can speak if you want to speak. Don't want to type, you can speak out. Just unmute your mic and speak out. Jacqui,
Okay,
I
it
think you
seems.
just have to continue.
Yeah, I've got a feeling they've got a feeling that this is as scaled as it's going to get. Okay, guys. So I mean, that's the use case that I've got. That's what we've got for the session. I was hoping to show you pretty much how we can take input that we've got from Word or from Excel at least, put that into Word and kind of send that back. That is something that we get quite commonly. It's a problem that we solve quite often. So it's definitely something that we've seen occur quite a lot, and it's really cool that UiPath are taking issues that we face on a day-to-day basis, and they're creating templates like this for us to use. The beautiful part about these templates is they give us an understanding of how we can, solve the problem. It also helps us understand how we can build this from scratch, how we can manipulate the problem, and those are, some of my favorite things about UiPath. So, I mean, considering what we've now learned, over the last 10 days, we've done things like word manipulation. We've worked with some Excel manipulation. We even worked with PowerPoint manipulation. So this is kind of the beginning, right? I mean, there's so much more that you can do with this. You can take what's happening in the Word document, you can take what is happening in the Excel document, and you can actually populate what is going on in PowerPoint, right? So you can send off a spreadsheet to yourself with a few, very, very basic fields that have been kind of populated, and you can spin out a presentation for yourself. And we can definitely see quite a few use cases of where this could work, especially when we're working with clients. If we've got, situations and kind of use cases where we're presenting things to clients on almost a day-to-day basis, there are a few things that you probably want to do, right? I mean, you'd want to get almost like a contract together. You'd want to pre-populate that contract. You'd want to get a presentation together where you can explain to them what the facts are. And all of that can be driven literally just from a few input variables. You don't have to go in and do the hard work. And I mean, to a lot of us, it sounds, quite easy if all you're doing is changing values and updating and replacing values. It sounds quite easy, but it still takes us some time to do it, right? I mean, these are the problems with our administrative tasks. So when we start looking at replacing files and creating replicated PowerPoint presentations, so on and so forth, it could take us anything from about half an hour to an hour to kind of get this ready. So with these kinds of use cases, there's a lot that you can do. There's a lot of things that you can try, that you can play around with, that you can change to speed up things in your own life. And even if it is just half an hour that you can, save, it's half an hour that you can use doing something that you enjoy a lot more. And I think that's something that we're really passionate about in this community. And this is something that we want to share with you, because if we can help you save time in your own day, then it gives you more time to learn and kind of interact with these sessions a lot more. So, I mean, if there's nothing else, this is kind of going to be where I conclude. I don't know if there's any questions or, any further comments.
Guys, if you have any question, this is the time to ask it. Okay, so Asha is saying it was a good use case. Okay, just commenting on the session. So yes, Asha, you're correct. So it's a nice use case by Jacqui. Reminded us of word automation, Excel automations, iterations, email automation, and we add the added bonus of getting some development tips in terms of best practices. So as far as we're concerned, it was a whole package. The use case was a whole package. So I expect that, or I want to believe that we all gained from this session. It's our last session, so thank you very much, Jacqui, for that. Thank you for a wonderful session. Any comments or question from any other person? Okay, I know some of our facilitators are not here, so we want to thank Jacqui, we want to thank Olaoluwa, Emmanuel, Nidi, Dennis Akweko, as well as Jonathan, for all the time they've spent with us, and you guys too for joining us on this journey for the past 10 sessions. It has been a wonderful experience, and we're going to have a season 2 of this, but that will be focusing on Studio, and that will be for actual developers. So you can help us spread the word. We're going to have something like this very soon, and that will focus on using Studio itself. So thank you, everyone, and please remember to join African chapters in Johannesburg, Lagos, Nairobi, and Accra. So thank you, everyone, and do enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.